Welcome to the Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic adventure games. I am one of your hosts for this episode, Jason Compton, joined once again by Dave Hawkins, who is in a lovely area of France. Dave, introduce yourself to the audience again, please.
Hello again. It's great to be back, and yeah, I am indeed in a lovely area of France. So at the moment, all I can see is fog.
It's a nice early autumn day here in Wisconsin in the U.S. So one of us got a better deal on geography, but I guess I've got the advantage on weather right now. We are in another of our traditional game formats this time around. Our appetizer game is the pseudo-educational classic Swiss Family Robinson. Our main course is the all mythology, all fighting, all tracking down food and wine, Valhalla. Dave, the first game we'll take on is the appetizer game, and that was my recommendation, Swiss Family Robinson, which was one of the early games from Windham's Classics, which was an American label that did a lot of, or a small number of conversions of youth skewing novels to the computer format. And they're responsible for one of my all-time favorite games, Below the Root, which is not a parser-based game, and so not likely to be covered on Retro Adventures anytime soon. But Swiss Family Robinson was one of their parser-centric games, and it's a little bit different in its structure. It's a text graphic adventure, and I believe this is the first time that you'd encountered it, right, Dave?
It certainly is. I mean, I was aware of the game actually existed, but I'd never played it. Again, it was because it was one of those games that I don't really think made it over to Europe. And again, with things as the apples being out of our price range over here, as we've discussed many times before, it was something that sort of just slipped under my radar. But I'm very glad you introduced me to it.
Yeah, so on the surface, it's very much like the text graphic adventures of its time, the early 80s, kind of following that Sierra split screen model that then became popular from a number of other publishers. But the parser is, I guess I would put it's on rails in that rather than worrying about guess the verb or supporting lots of synonyms or, making you identify things, the parser is very clear. Either the word is accepted and then it becomes highlighted, or it's not something you can use and you simply can't enter it. And this was obviously meant to make the parser experience a little more accessible to younger players that either wouldn't have as big of a vocabulary or might just get frustrated. How did you find that experience?
I actually particularly liked that. There was some confusion in the beginning, in that I actually felt that if a word was highlighted, that it wasn't recognized. That aside, I found it very useful, and I particularly liked the way that the sentences themselves would be auto-completed in many cases, which I found quite useful. Although they did have a bit of an obsession with whatever I'd put, it wanted to put in the ink jar, which I found quite having quite a lot.
Yeah,
So.
you're right that because that highlight format, I've seen that in other games I think that we've played where right it'll kick back an unrecognized word in highlight format, but no, what you're looking to light it up in this one, and yeah, the autocomplete I forget about that as being that's probably the first place that I encountered it, long before tab autocomplete on a Unix shell or something like that. You've got autocomplete in this 1984 parser game, which does cleave reportedly pretty close to the plot of Swiss Family Robinson. I don't believe I ever read the novel as a youth. Certainly haven't read it for a while. But the upshot is you are Fritz Robinson, the eldest son of the aforementioned Swiss Family Robinson. You're shipwrecked and need to find a way to safety, and you're put in charge of an awful lot of things. The family who shows up in little talk screens and advice columns. They're all there, but they're like, no, Fritz, you go handle it. Take Franz and the dog, and you save the day. So how did you find your tour behind the wheel of Fritz Robinson?
I particularly enjoyed it, I've got to say. Talking about the game in general, I will say that I found some of the parser options a little strange, and some of the puzzles I found them challenging, but not because I didn't know what to do, but because you needed to go through the process step by step, and I found that quite unusual. For example, I mean, if you want to light a fire, you had to take the matchbox, open the matchbox, take the match, light the driftwood, and that seemed overly complicated for what really should have just been light fire.
So yeah, content by way of step by stepping it rather than just we know what we're after here. Yeah, I think you had mentioned that the initial just getting off of the wrecked vessel to the comparative safety of the island was a little bit of a trouble for you.
It certainly was. It took me about 2 hours before. Um, the complete lack of directions and any of the descriptions didn't help either. It took me quite a while to realize there was actually a below deck.
Mm. Yeah, and there is another thing that this game pioneered was, in my view, a pretty good auto map. That was embedded in the world. You get a map, and by reading it, you can see where you've been. However, that's true as you're just getting started, as you're aboard the wrecked vessel. It's not as clear, and I think people were probably either expected to learn from the tutorial, which it does have a nice little
Mm.
tutorial mode or just the list of verbs and nouns that you can access to be able to navigate that early sequence. So that's a good point that was not as clear as it might have been.
Mm. I mean, I didn't find it, say, overly challenging as an actual game, but it's a large game. I will say for an appetizer, I was expecting it to be a little bit smaller. There was certainly a lot of travelling around, but you say the auto map really does help. And overall, it's quite a different one because, I mean, I've not read the book. I've seen the film several times, and it seems to follow the plot of the film fairly closely, which I assume follows the book. So if you look at it from that direction, film, book, game, I think it's probably a fair representation. Uh, how would I really sort of say? I mean, I think I didn't actually complete it. I've got to admit, I only got about three-quarters of the way through. And I will admit that I ended up resorting to cheating because I had to do that right at the very beginning because I just couldn't work out how to get off the boat. But once I was actually off the boat and onto the island, I found the game actually flowed quite smoothly. I mean, how did you find from there?
Yeah, I was playing this with the, those hazy, 38-ish-year-old memories of I know that I had found a way to speed through the critical path a little bit faster, and I couldn't re-find that. But I know that like you were saying it seemed like a surprisingly long game. I remember when I first completed, I'm like, huh, that seemed a little easier than I would have thought, and I was not able to stumble back into it. But there is definitely a way to avoid having to. Make 80,000 different types of steaks. One of the
Hmm.
game's quirks when you kill a meat animal and then cut it up, the game just kind of by way of I don't know euphemizing it, you get lion steaks and bear steaks and stuff
Yes.
like that. There was definitely a way to speed through that and get through the game a little bit faster, and I didn't re-find that, but I did find a game that I think really achieved what it was after, which was a an intermediate challenge for a parser game that would take a younger player through. And we know that the world of parser games didn't then unfold over the next 15 years in the commercial market the way that it could. But I think the idea was sound. Things like the auto mapping were nice features that we wouldn't see in necessarily in as many games as we could have later on. And a game that, yes, it was big and yes, it had a lot of fiddly steps, but it didn't have a lot of, go south and die or random events that killed you. So in that sense, it was fairly friendly to younger players.
Hmm. No, definitely was. I mean, and as you say, there were a lot of features that we didn't see for many years, and in some cases just never appeared in a Veg game. So, I mean, I think had I played this when I was younger, it probably would have had some kind of impact on the way that I actually developed text adventures, because I think there's a lot of things in there that have benefits to you, your standard play. I mean, like the autocomplete. But from another point of view, I really miss the lack of descriptions. There were so many locations that have just got a picture and that's it. There's no indication of where you are, what it is. Is a swamp? Is this the bamboo forest? Is this by the sea? And it was kind of difficult to really tell exactly where you were.
Yeah, I agree that that's an area because although it is a disk load game, it is memory resident once it's all said and done, and that's obviously a way that a place where some memory was saved. You do get the painted graphics, you don't get extensive descriptions.
Hmm.
But overall, I think it was an interesting game to visit as an appetizer. Really appreciate you taking a play through it with me. And we'd like to move now to our main course, which is Valhalla. This was a suggestion from Dave this time around. So, Dave, would you please cue up Valhalla for the listeners?
I certainly will. Valhalla is an interesting kind of game. It's possibly one of the only of its kind, in that it was a text adventure with interactive graphical elements where you would see everything that you typed, you would physically see the reactions on screen. So if your character went to pick up a bottle of wine or a sword, you'd see them walk across the screen as a little stick man, pick up the object, and then they'd be seen carrying it. It was actually a very largely hyped game in the UK with complete double spread adverts in magazines long before it came out. And just as a note of interest, it was being hyped as the next Hobbit. I think we might be able to talk a little bit more about that as we get deeper into it. But how did you find it, Jason?
Ooh, well, I want to talk a little bit about that background first. Yes, I noticed that, in the promo material, it is discussed as being a computer movie. There are outfits like Cinemaware that would come along a few years later, and in my opinion, do that sort of thing much, much better. But I was like, okay, computer movie, let's see. Yeah, you did anticipate one of my comments because, yeah, the that kind of hybrid interface, which, again, like Swiss Family Robinson, from a from a 50,000 foot view, it looks like kind of the classic Sierra split screen view, but there's this extra layer in that it's not just the background that you see in front of you. No, no, you see all of the different characters on screen and you see objects on screen and they move, linearly left and right to pick up or drop objects or attack each other or so forth. And yeah, this was part of the interactive, computer movie experience. And I walked away saying, this feels like Order of the Stick level graphics,
Mhm.
right down to on each screen, which is helpful in its way. But there are little arrows that appear and captions for each of the characters and the objects. It's like, well, okay, that is useful, but it really just kind of drives home like this is in fact about what I'd be expecting from a webcomic that was taking on this topic. Um, so the goal of this game is to be a Norse god that succeeds in entering Valhalla. Am I getting this right?
You are getting it right. Yep.
Yeah. And it's interesting. In between the time that we set this game and recorded, we've just hit the 40th anniversary of Elite's release. Now, Elite is a open world space combat and trading game. It is not something Retro Adventures is going to cover. But I bring it up because the discussion and the nostalgia for Elite is very much like the discussion and the hype around Valhalla. And the very similar terms are being used. These are games where anything can happen and you can do anything and the other actors in the world can do anything, but that really just boils down to they move around and they attack you in annoying ways.
Mm.
So um I'll back off for now because I'd like you to set a little more of the stage for how Valhalla plays and what sets it apart. But I will jump in with more of this, like what do we mean when we say anything can happen and you can do anything?
Well, I mean, I think in many ways, actually, that there's a fairly traditional text adventure if you think about it. I mean, if you wanted to compare it to The Hobbit, which I think is very unfair, I mean, you've got a similar level of communication, you've got a similar parser. The unusually for a British game, it actually had a graphic in every location, which was kind of, I think, necessary for the nature of the game. But I've always kind of, even when I played it originally back in the 80s, I was sort of torn on whether it really was a text adventure, or whether it was more of, I think now we might even consider calling it sort of interactive fiction. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that.
Hmm. I I'm not super caught up in the definition of what distinguishes interactive fiction, but if I were to go down that line, I would say that interactive fiction has a lot of storytelling and narrative to it, and I didn't find that in Valhalla. What I did find, and you alluded to this, there's a map which yes has illustrations for each location, and an innovative way of moving around the map in that there are both standard directional controls and this ring-based teleport system.
Mm,
And this is arguably easier to suss out when you look at a map of the world. And Dave made apologies or qualifications for doing some cheating through Swiss Family Robinson. I will remind all of you, I'm just going to look at maps all the time, especially but not only when there are mazes involved in a game. And the ring system not every room allows it, but basically they're not it's not bi-directional in that like when you ring jump to one room, the ring jump out of that room will be to yet another room.
mm.
So that was that created some interesting challenges to move around. But when if you're saying like that you felt it was more interactive fiction, if the gods were wandering on screen and making interesting declamations or having dialogue with one another or things like that, I would say, oh, yes, there's the fiction element. But they were mostly wandering on screen to take objects from the screen, kill me at inopportune times, which was all of them, or watch me die of starvation because I'd moved 3 rooms and hadn't had anything to eat. So those to me didn't feel fictiony. But what do you mean when you say that it felt like interactive fiction?
I think I'm sort of thinking kind of the way. I mean, it's probably not actually the right description. But I think it's because I felt that you were almost watching I wouldn't really call it a movie, which is a difficult way because I mean, it's obviously that was the intention they wanted to give. But I kind of felt that when you're playing it, you're actually almost on the outside rather than being a participant. I mean, so maybe interactive fiction wasn't quite the right terminology. But I will say I didn't actually feel that immersed in it because I felt I was watching from the outside. I think that was really what I was trying to get across.
Okay. I see what you're saying for sure there. And yes, so to frame this, the background of the game, the manual comes with a description of all the various Norse gods that are wandering around. It gives them kind of a sliding scale of things like, strength and goodness. And things like that.
It does.
And so when they show up, you have some sort of guess, like, well, which one is likely to come over attack me or attack somebody else. There are ways in which you must use them to your advantage, by summoning them or hoping they show up in a room that you're in, so that you can accomplish something. In some cases, you have to get rid of them before you can move to another location or manipulate an object or things like that. So yes, there is that level of I think in part that where you have the third person view of your character because you have to slide your character left right across the screen, which I found a little bit fiddly, like you're literally just typing L and R to slide yourself across.
Yes.
I think that, and I think the way in which yes, The Hobbit, infamously has, Thorin wanders in and starts singing about gold and so forth. There's the notion that the other characters will move independently, but there's so many of them in Valhalla, and they literally cause death and destruction when they come in. So it does take a little bit of that first person player agency away. I think it does detach you a little bit from the story, even though yes, you can see your character and yes, you are ordering them around in a lot of parsery ways. Speaking of parsery ways, I have a note here to remind myself of interface quirks, and the way I wrote it was list instead of inventory. Arg! I remember having to remember that and guess at that again as I was playing. An unusual choice in terms of how to manage your unfortunately very limited inventory.
Yes. Yes, it really was actually. I mean, uh, for me overall, I mean, I think the game, no one's ever really done anything like it since, and I'm not that I'm aware of. I mean, you aware of anything in the US that had similar style or?
Boy, I'm blanking on that. I mean, this really does feel like because there is a theme through a lot of these main course games that we've looked at, The Hobbit, Twin Kingdom Valley, and now this. They're all trying to fill that world, and this is something that I've talked about before. Rather than it being a static text adventure where you're raiding the tomb or plundering the great underground empire in Zork, things like that. They're all trying to say here's an alive world that's got it's got elves and wizards and Norse gods running around in it.
Mm.
And I think we find out maybe that it's a bit too much of the good stuff. Maybe we can back off on that because unfortunately they get in our way more than they're helping us enjoy the story, I think.
Mm. I think that's definitely true, and particularly in Valhalla. Did you come across Loki, who seems to spend most of his time just trying to steal things off you?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yep, yep. And I mean the chaos is of course part of the point, but it made it very difficult to make progress between somebody can just show up at the wrong moment and take something that's very critical. We've mentioned death. This is a game in which death is not permanent. You can come back as many times as you like, but
Mm.
your inventory gets scattered. And the game world itself, I mean, the map is, I believe, 81 locations. That doesn't sound too terrible. But then there's the eating and drinking system, and it's very hard to make consistent progress without dying of hunger or thirst.
Yep, it absolutely is. I mean, you spend most of your time actually, particularly looking for wine, which I think is the one that sustains you the most. Um, it's I'm trying to really sort of summarize how I kind of feel about it because it's left me a little ambivalent to be honest, and I don't really know where it sits.
It was a I absolutely understand why, even at this time, 83, 84, you had developers saying we can't just do more treasure hunt adventures. I absolutely
Mm.
get that. But unfortunately, the things that end up creating the challenge and the difficulty are inventory management problems. The how do I carry the objects I need? Many of the puzzles boil down to you need to obtain these rare artifacts and
Yes.
kind of use them, possess them to get to the next stage of the game. But when those are being lost when you die, when you're having to figure out where to stash them, who you can possibly maybe safely give them to hang on to them for you, because again, those characters can get killed and their inventory scattered. It was. Whew, it was a challenging one. I made another note here. Um, the game Baldur's Gate 2, the D&D role-playing game from the year 2000,
Mm.
the way that I solved inventory problems with that, which is a big sweeping game with hundreds of hours of gameplay, et cetera, et cetera. You have semi-limited inventory, and I ended up storing all of my excess inventory in a sack in the back of the Copper Coronet Tavern. There's no place in this game to put the stuff that you need, whether it's the food and wine you need to hoard or the artifacts and the game's working against you. And I guess that's one of the things that made it tricky to enjoy because I wasn't sure where the developers thought that I was going to have that fun. And some of it, maybe is in the emergent experience of watching the chaos as all the different Norse gods show up and fight one another. But the business of trying to solve the game and get to the end, where as a fun little Easter egg, they all come in and congratulate you on your accomplishment. But boy, it was tough to get there.
It was. I mean, I didn't actually quite complete this one, but I got nearly to the end, and to be honest, I kind of lost interest, which it hasn't actually happened to me with most of the games. I've always found something, the ones we've played over the series, to say, yeah, there was enough to kind of keep me generally hooked, and if I hadn't managed to complete them, it was simply because I ran out of time. This on a replay made me feel that I wasn't overly bothered at the end to whether I knew what happened.
Yeah. Speaking of descriptions, as we did in Swiss Family Robinson,
Mm.
where there was kind of a lack of insight into objects, one of the things that was pretty limiting about the Valhalla experience is that you can't just look at somebody and say, does this person have an object that I may, want or need? Like there is a commerce system in the game where you can spend money to get objects, including but not limited to your life-sustaining food and wine. But you
Mm,
can't just look at them and ask for a description. What you can do is hit the help command. And one of the possible outputs of that is to tell you, something about one of the characters in the room. But that just, it felt again like, why are you making me jump through this hoop? Either help me figure out what's in this room, or I don't know, or make it easier for me to survive.
mm. I would agree with that. I mean, I mean, it isn't just that. I mean, as you've pointed out earlier, the necessity to actually read the manual to get the strengths and weaknesses of all of the characters. It was one of the first games that ever came across that, rather than just reading a manual and saying this is, a bit of a help guide about basic play, you really did need to actually use the help, the actual manual itself, to understand the game, and that actually I felt was quite a unique feature at the time.
Yeah, I think
I don't
that's
know.
certainly a strength of the game, especially for a lot of its peer games where, right, the instructions might have been limited to what you could get on the J card. I thought that the level of documentation and kind of setup and immersion, I thought those were definitely strengths.
Yes, they definitely were. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, the game was massively hyped here. I mean, did you get this in the US, by the way?
That was a note that I made. Much like Twin Kingdom Valley, which I did a little bit of research, and it was a game that only showed up from a lower tier publisher, kind of a little bit past its premiere date here in the U.S. Similar story with Valhalla. The earliest mention I can find of it being sold in the U.S. is from a 1987 issue of Ahoy magazine, which was one of
Wow.
the U.S. C64 magazines. It was sold through Eurosoft, which was a company, kind of like the reverse of US Gold, where they would bring in European games and sell here,
Mm,
and it was $25. Now, it's well established that games in the US were much more expensive than their UK counterparts generally, but to ask $25 for this game in 1987, that was tough. Like this was not a game that looked visually stunning in 83, 84, let alone 87. I don't recall if I ever saw it, live on a store shelf, but I definitely would have been disappointed to pay the kind of money that you were paying to get a recent, say Electronic Arts release of the time that was doing a lot more to take advantage of the C64's capabilities. To pay what
mm,
was, pretty close to full price in 87, that would have been tough. So yeah, this was a game that obviously kicked around a little bit until one of those lower tier publishers said, well, we can make a little bit off of this here in the U.S. market, but yeah, did not have a big splash on release, and in my opinion, was not appropriately priced for what it was and the spot it occupied in the market by 87.
no, that is a hefty price tag. If I recall, it was 14.99 when it was released
Ooh,
in the
yeah, that
UK.
was a real full price game then.
That it was a proper yeah, really. I mean, this is the time. I mean, The Hobbit, I think, was 9.99, and that came with the book. So we are talking here that they genuinely believed in this,
Yeah.
or was it they were living off the hype, which I kind of felt that. I say because the hype was so big, with massive double spread in all the magazines, and it was one of the first games that they were advertising it months and months ahead of its release, which I
Mm.
don't recall ever happening in with other games in the UK. I mean, there might have been a few that were saying, next month or something like that. But I mean, we are talking 8, 9 months that these adverts were going out. Um, so in many ways, I mean, the price tag may literally have been associated with its marketing, and the simple fact they had to recover it.
Yeah. And, selling the sizzle, I mean, it's not just cynical. Part of getting people excited and feeling like they're having a good time playing the game is to make them feel like, a sense of anticipation, something to blow off. It's just that unfortunately, when the rubber meets the road and these little stick figures are kind of, plodding around, you go like, was this what we were waiting for?
Yeah.
I made a few other notes about gameplay here, because, just to make it clear, it is one of those games where things are happening in more or less real time, whether whether or not you take a move, other characters are going to arrive, depart. They're going to attack one another, take objects, attack you. You can pause. I wrote that's nice. It does clear the screen, and I did find that it was sometimes difficult to keep the text around that I wanted to read. Text
Mm.
had a tendency to scroll away. It also is old enough that for those of you who remember things like the color black and white switch on the Atari 2600, it is old enough that it has a monochrome graphics mode. I was intrigued to note that for whatever reason, it is a one-way decision. That is, if you put it in monochrome mode and change your mind, too bad you can't just, ask for color graphics again. You have to reboot the game. But always interesting when there's enough black and white displays out there that the high contrast mode is still a priority.
Uh,
I ran into a bug.
Oh
I don't know if
yeah.
you and I was playing the 64 version, so I don't know if this is
I was
unique for
going to
you.
say you must have been because I played the Spectrum version and it's all in black and white. There was no option for me.
Ah, okay, that's right. Yeah, and I did choose the 64 version honestly because I'd read like, well, the 64 version had improved graphics. I'm like, then that's the one for me because even that doesn't look great, but that makes sense. Yeah, I ran into some bugs regarding the trading system. So one thing that would happen to me sometimes when I would, for example, I have this note here. So I sold wine to Kier for 30 coins. I forget the unit.
Mm.
But then it said there is no money here. So I'm like, okay, so this is a bug where they can stiff you. They get the wine, but you don't get the money. And I also found that when I was in a trading setting, because you could say like, you know, offer 20 to Kier for whatever, the sword or so forth.
Yeah,
And they would
absolutely.
say they would it would say, well, 20 is not enough. But what I found was that the parser would get partially broken if I then tried to just navigate normally with a an abbreviation, like putting in W to go west, it would
Right.
reply, the W is not enough. I had to
Mm.
then do like go east or enter some other commands to kind of break it out of being stuck in that trading loop.
Yeah, there's such as I think what you've really hit on there is because there was such a comparison by Legend, the company that developed it, to compare it to the Hobbit. I think the expectations of the parser were much higher than the game offered. Really, I mean, like you say, it is quite complicated to actually use. There was some oddities like the L and R to go left and right. And the parser itself was actually relatively weak, as you've pointed out. So I think, I mean, overall, what we're looking at here, isn't it, is the game has attempted to be a lot more than it's actually delivered.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting attempt and noble in that sense, in that they were definitely trying to push the envelope and trying to give people that and clearly I think what the market was demanding, and definitely what a lot of these early developers were trying to supply was we want to show you that inside your little plastic computer is a thriving world where anything can happen. It's just that unfortunately that anything is pretty tightly bound to a few different actions, at least the way that
Yes.
we've designed this game. Um, yeah, and by the way, like full disclosure, I did not manage to complete this game on my own. I actually ended up finding there's a collection of C64 endings, which are games that are basically frozen just before the moment of victory. So I
Right.
used that to see how the end plays out. So and I'd heard about the congratulation sequence, and yes, it is fun watching them all come in and congratulate you. But the game, true to its roots, I guess, eventually the game gets bored of doing that, and then they just all hang around and start fighting one another again. So the
Yes. Yeah.
the the loop continues.
Well, I mean, my guess would be is that because they had attempted to give them all personalities, and I think after a while that once they started hacking at each other, whether it was a sword or an axe, and I think they punch each other as well, that they just the actual characters had built up a massive resentment to each other by the time you're about three-quarters of the way through the game.
And who knows how many times they've died, yeah, and been through the Hell Gate and back.
Exactly, exactly.
Did you have a particularly frustrating death, something that you were, really on the cusp of? I mean, for me, honestly, it was all just about, like there's food, there's right there. I know I can get you. Now I'm dead of
Yes,
starvation
there's a
again.
lot of that. A lot of me taking too long to walk across the screen to pick it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's just talk overall. I mean, what would you think? I mean, I don't think it's really overly fair to compare this generally to text adventures, as I've sort of alluded to earlier. So, what would you say your overall impression of the game was?
I mean, to frame it in a single word, my overall impression, unfortunately, was poor. I don't think that it did not execute the graphics at a high level. It didn't, in my view, execute the interactivity at a high level. The attract mode, for lack of a better way to put it, of just kind of booting it up and watching people wander in and thump one another. That unfortunately is about as far as the emergent gameplay goes. So you don't get you don't have new rich worlds to discover. I do think, like I said, the map and the transport system was interesting, and I think that overall was a success. I do think that they did a good job creating a diverse but not oppressive map
Mm,
in that sense. But as a story, it's quite weak. As a kind of what have I learned by going through this parser adventure? What have I learned about ways to express myself, or vocabulary, or problem solving? It's not that kind of game. So yeah, I walked away with it wondering exactly what its legacy and its descendants are. I do know that there was a sequel that had been discussed and hyped, but never really came to be. Do you know more about
mm.
that?
No, to be honest, I think it was the only game Legend actually ever made. I haven't looked into this, but I don't recall there being anything else from them.
Yeah. Swiss Family Robinson, that was a game by Tom Snyder Productions, which, especially for Americans, even if you don't remember them, you've definitely played some of their games. If you were of a certain age and, had a C64 or Apple or Atari,
Mm,
games like Agent USA, which is a fun little, learn geography as you go around trying to squash this alien menace kind of game. They did good work in educational software early on, and you can kind of see their fingerprints. And they also, Tom Snyder Productions went on to become a very prolific animation studio behind a number of cartoon series. But yeah, Valhalla feels a little more of a dead end. Certainly not the last time that Norse mythology would be used as the seed for a game, but this kind of hybrid interface where they didn't want to fully commit to a what we would call a platform style of interaction, but also didn't fully want to take you out of the parser world either.
mm,
It sort of feels like a dead end.
I'd agree with that summary, to be honest. My overall thought, I mean, I think because it was advertised for so many months, I kind of have the impression that in the end the game was rushed through because either it was becoming too expensive to keep advertising it, because it feels generally like they hadn't actually hit what they intended to do, and it was almost like well, that's going to have to do. This is where we are now. I
Interesting.
mean,
Yeah,
I don't
at
know.
some point you do have to ship. So
Yeah, yeah. At some point you've got to ship. Yeah, exactly. And that's really how the game felt to me, and it was how it felt when I actually originally played it. And at the time, 14.99 was a lot of money for me at the time, and I wasn't overly impressed. I wanted us to play it because I felt it was a fairly unique game for the British market, and for the European market. I believe there was a version for Europe, but can't swear to that. So overall, disappointing. Glad I went back to see it. That would be my overall opinion.
yeah, no, I'm definitely glad to have had the excuse, the reason, the framing mechanism to play and experience this game, even if it was not the strongest output that we've seen on any of these platforms. But
No,
that is Valhalla. I do encourage everyone to check out both of these games. They will be very different experiences. Swiss Family Robinson again has a sprawling map, but a fairly linear set of goals to it. Valhalla definitely more wide ranging. There's a certain sequence to how you need to acquire some of those artifacts and string things together. But particularly as much of the game code is in BASIC, if somebody were to go out there and tweak a sort of Valhalla remastered to take away some of the eating and drinking requirements, that might make
Mm.
it an easier playthrough. I actually would be interested to see somebody take that on. It's probably easy enough to find, says me, who didn't sit down to break out and look at the code, but I bet it's doable.
I would say it probably was. And I've got to say, at the time, I was rather surprised to find it was in BASIC, given the hype. I mean, it felt very much like a sort of back bedroom project.
There's a lot of games out there for a surprising period that are largely or fundamentally basic under the hood. And most notably, a lot of those microprose games that Sid Meier put out are largely basic.
Mm,
Pirates being maybe one of the most famous examples, which does not, quote, feel like a, quote, basic game, but actually most of the game logic is done in basic because they
mm.
just found it easy to do that way. So yeah, so Valhalla, Dave, really appreciate you suggesting it. We will be back with both more interviews and more of our two game formats. But I think for now, this is Jason Compton signing off from the Retro Adventurers.
Yep. And thank you everyone for joining us, and we will be back soon. You have been listening to The Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This episode was produced by Jason Compton and Dave Hawkins, with editing by Dave Hawkins. Please subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, including Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Podcast Addict. Visit us at retroadventurers.com and follow us on Facebook. The Retro Adventurers is based on a format originally devised by Ben Collier, Jason Compton, and Dave Hawkins.